Hello, everyone. Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about Macbeth. So, in this lesson, we're going to look at Act 4, Scene 3. Now, it's a long scene, and it's a bit of a strange scene, actually. But one question about it is why Shakespeare made it so long. And no one really knows the answer to that question. But the important point about that is that this is a play, okay? It's a live thing on stage with real people acting and real people in the audience watching, okay? So the writer, the playwright, has to think about those things. So in terms of the actors, for example, they may need a break, they may need to change costumes, and the audience may need a mental break in the sense that, so for example, here in the previous scene, we we saw a child being murdered, right? So that's the worst thing that you can see. So the writer might think that the audience needs a bit of a break. I mean, in this particular case, they don't get much of a break because in the second half, we get the news about the killings. So the point is that it's a long scene and it is an important scene because, firstly, in the second half, Macduff finds out about the killings and that makes him obviously, even more angry and vengeful against Macbeth, okay? And before that, in the first half, there's a lot of talking and examples of what makes a good or bad king. So, in that sense, this scene is really, really important, right? That's one of the main themes of the play: leadership, kingship, what makes a good or bad king. So, in that sense, this scene is very, very important. Having said that, it's quite long and many bits of it are not that important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it and just highlight the bits that you need to be aware of. We're not going to listen to the audio because the audio alone is almost 15 minutes. And I don't think you really need to listen to it for this particular scene. Okay. So remember that most productions of any Shakespeare play do make choices about whether to cut out bits or not. And in our case, and they do that for all kinds of reasons. And in our case, we have to think about what we need to know for GCSE. So Shakespeare plays are very unusual. They are taught all the way from primary to university. And at primary level, you might just learn tiny bits of it, and that increases as you go along. A level is probably when you have to really read the whole play in detail, and then obviously at university. At GCSE, you are expected to read and understand most of the play, and obviously try and watch various versions as well. But at GCSE, there are bits that you can cut out. You have to work a bit smart, okay? Not just work hard all the time. You have to do both of those things. Okay, so let's go through it then. So the summary is that Malcolm and Macduff discuss the terrible things that have happened in Scotland and the nature of leadership. A doctor arrives to say something. Ross arrives to tell Macduff that his wife and children have been killed. So to start with, Malcolm and Macduff are talking about Scotland and how sad they are and how terrible Scotland has become under Macbeth. And here, so a big part of this scene here is Malcolm does not know whether he can trust Macduff or not. For all he knows, Macduff may have been sent by Macbeth. He may just be pretending to be against Macbeth, and he may have been sent to trick Malcolm in some way. Okay, so this bit here, he starts by trying to work out Macduff's motivations, and he's suggesting that Macduff could give up Malcolm to Macbeth to make him happy, to make Macbeth happy, so to appease an angry god. So he's talking about Macbeth there. And Macbeth says, "I'm not treacherous. I'm not a traitor." And Malcolm says, "But Macbeth is." And he says that, "Please forgive me, but I'm trying to work out your thoughts. I can't seem to work them out right now." And this makes Macduff very unhappy, the fact that Malcolm doesn't trust him, and he says, I have lost my hopes, yeah. And then this bit here, Malcolm asks the same question that Macduff's wife asked, which is why did he leave his wife and children? Now, in the last scene, we suggested that Macduff left them because he probably thought they would be safe, that he didn't think that Macbeth would kill them for no reason. He knows that Macbeth will kill people who stand in his way, okay, who are against him, who are a danger to him, but Lady Macduff and her children are no danger to Macbeth, so Macduff probably thought that they would be safe. From Malcolm's point of view, he might be thinking that Macduff left them because he knew they would be safe because he was on Macbeth's side. Okay, I mean, so yeah, you don't need to worry too much about all this, but this is what's going on here. Okay, and so Macduff again, he kind of loses hope and his mind switches off and he starts thinking about his country. So we know that from his point of view, he's left because he loves his country. It's not that he's in a way he has put his country above his family, but like I say, from his point of view, he thought they'd be safe. Okay, and basically he's saying here that he would not be a traitor for any amount of money, and the rich each to boot. So in other words, any amount of money, he would not be a traitor. And then and then he goes on to say, I mean, first of all, he again says, please don't be offended. And then he goes on to say how obviously sad he is that Scotland is suffering. And he says that, don't worry, I've got offers of thousands of soldiers from England to help me fight Macbeth. But then he says, and this is where it becomes a bit strange, but he says that whoever takes over Scotland will be even worse than Macbeth. And Macduff is a bit puzzled by this. Okay, what should he be, or who's that? How so? And Malcolm says that he's talking about himself. He's saying that he knows that Macbeth is terrible, but that compared to Malcolm, he's nothing. He's like a lamb. Okay, so Malcolm is even worse than Macbeth. That's Malcolm saying that. But he's pretending. Okay, he's testing out Macduff's loyalty. And Macduff says, no, nobody could be worse than Macbeth. And then Malcolm says, I agree that he's really, really bad. Now, these two lines are important. So here are some examples of what Shakespeare thinks are the bad qualities of a king. Okay, so luxurious, avaricious means greedy, false, deceitful, sudden. So sudden meaning acting without thinking. Malicious means somebody who is harmful. Okay, who acts out of evil or evil. And so these are all the things that are bad. Okay, but then he goes on to say, but I am even worse than that. Okay. And he talks about voluptuousness, which I've translated here as luxury or pleasure. But here he's talking about sexuality. And he's saying that no amount of women, no number of women could satisfy my lust. Okay. And he's saying it's better that Macbeth remains king than Malcolm. And Macduff still, he doesn't believe him, or maybe he doesn't want to believe him. And he says, yeah, it's true that lack of moderation is a really bad thing in nature. But don't worry, there's plenty of women who would be happy to go with you when you're a king. Okay, you don't need to worry. You'll be able to get more than enough women to satisfy yourself. But then Malcolm says, but that's not the only thing. I'm going to take all the land from the rich people. I'm going to take their jewels and their houses, and I'm going to create arguments for no reason at all. Okay. And Macduff says, okay, that's really bad. That's even worse than what you said earlier. But don't worry, Scotland's got plenty of riches to satisfy you. I'm sure, here, these two lines here says, I'm sure no matter what your bad qualities are, that your good qualities will balance them out or will outweigh them. And Malcolm says, but I've got no good qualities. Okay, but I have none. I have no good qualities. Now, these two lines are important, three lines, in fact. So here is a list of qualities that Shakespeare says are good qualities. Okay, so justice, verity means truthfulness, temperance, stableness, bounty, perseverance, mercy, lowliness, devotion, patience, courage, fortitude. You don't need to understand every single word there, but I'm sure you understand most of them. So these are the list of qualities that Shakespeare thinks are good. So, as I said, one of the main points about this scene is that Shakespeare's trying to make is what is a good or bad king. Okay, so these are the good qualities. And Malcolm pretends that he doesn't have any love of these qualities. And then he goes on to say, no, if I have power, I'm going to basically just end all peace. I'm going to just create fights and arguments and end all kind of unity on earth. So Macbeth now starts to grieve again. Oh, Scotland, Scotland. So you can see that he's totally obsessed with his country. He loves his country. So from a neutral point of view, you can see that he has fled to England because he loves Scotland. He loves his country, and he wants to kind of gather up people to help him, or he wants to help whoever is willing to attack Macbeth. And obviously, in this case, Malcolm is that person because he's Duncan's son. He's the rightful king. And Malcolm says, okay, so I'm all these terrible things. Now tell me if you think I should be king. And Macduff says, fit to govern? No, not to live. No, you're not fit to govern. You're not even fit to live. And so he starts being miserable about his country again and saying, oh, at the moment it's being ruled by somebody who should not, by a wrongful king, so untitled tyrant. So that's Macbeth, by the wrong king. And now I'm being told by the very person Malcolm that he himself is not fit to be king either. And here he says to Malcolm, "What's wrong with you? Your father was so good. He was such a good king. Your queen, your mother, the queen, so was so good. She spent half her time praying to God." And then he says, "Oh my best, thy hope ends here." So he's talking to himself, to his heart, to himself, saying, "Oh, your hope is over. My hope is over." So Macduff's hope is over. And now finally, Malcolm is convinced and he says, okay, I trust you now. I believe you. And actually, and he says that basically, devilish Macbeth, the devil Macbeth, has tried to kind of trick me by all these kind of means. That's why I wasn't sure. That's why I was sort of testing you. And I don't want to believe people too quickly. And he could be he might be thinking about his father here because we know that Duncan trust was a bit too easy to trust people. Maybe not all the time, maybe not when he was younger, but maybe when he got older and kind of started losing his brain power. But we know from the play, from previous scenes, that Duncan was a bit too trusting. But now Malcolm says, okay, I trust you. And now, actually, I'm going to tell you the truth. I renounce everything I said earlier. Actually, none of that is true. In fact, I've never even been anywhere near a woman and I've never lied. I wouldn't even betray the devil. Okay. And he says, I'm at your command and I'm at my country's command. When he says at your command to Macduff, obviously that doesn't mean that Macduff is superior to him. He's just saying, okay, yes, I'm on your side. I'm going to help you and we're going to go and attack Macbeth together. And he says, and in fact, I've got 10,000 soldiers coming with old Seaward. Okay. So it's called Old C word, not necessarily that he's old as such, but there's two C words. There's old and young, so they're like the father and the son, saying that he's already set forth and we're going to get together and we'll march on Macbeth together. And then he says, why are you silent to Macduff? And obviously Macduff is silent because he's trying to work this out. Malcolm has gone from one thing to the other and he's saying, oh yeah, I'm just trying to work it out. And then the doctor enters. So the next bit is actually cut out from the audio version that we've been listening to. We're not going to listen to it for this particular video. But Malcolm says, more soon is the king coming. So this is King Edward, okay, not King James. So the play is set in about 1040 AD, when King Edward was the king. It was written in 1606 when King James was the king. So this is King Edward. Now, here's another example of from Shakespeare of what a good king should be. So King Edward was apparently a very good king, a holy king. He could cure people. So people used to come to be cured by him. He would either touch them or kind of pray for them, and he would be healed. Okay. And I mean, we don't need to worry too much about this, but Macduff says, what disease is he talking about? And Malcolm says the disease of evil. So he could be talking about like evil spirits, demons, something like that, which people used to believe in those days. And apparently the king could cure that, but he could also cure physical illnesses. So, or so like ulcers and so on. Okay. So yeah, he could cure things and he's full of many graces. So everybody had a good opinion about him. Okay, so now we're going to move to the second half of the scene. This could actually be a second different scene, actually, but Shakespeare has chosen to put them together. So Ross enters, and they say, "Who's that?" And then Malcolm doesn't know him initially, but then he recognizes him. That doesn't really matter. That's just a bit of stagecraft there from Shakespeare. And they ask him about Scotland, and he says, "Oh, it's terrible. Every day, worse things are happening." And we can skip all of this. And then Malcolm says, "So, what's the latest bad news?" And Ross says, "Well, every minute there's bad news." And now we're coming to the important bit. Macduff says, "How's my wife?" And in it now, initially, so Ross doesn't know how to give the bad news. So initially, he kind of says, "Oh, they're okay," and Macduff says, "Macbeth hasn't said anything to them." And here Ross is being sarcastic. They were well at peace when I did leave them. He's mean that phrase that we have, rest in peace. So when you're dead, you're obviously at peace, no matter what your life was like. But he's being ironic because he's trying to work out how to give the news. But there must be something in his tone of voice because Macduff says, "Come on, tell me, what is it? How's it going?" And Ross says, "Terrible. The tyrant is still exercising his power." And he's saying, "Your iron Scotland would create soldiers." He's saying, in other words, if they saw you, if you were there, it would motivate people to fight, even the women to fight. And Malcolm said, "Oh well, in that case, let them be comforted. We are coming. England has lent us 10,000 men, and this great general Seward, no better soldier than him." And Ross says, "Oh, if only I could give you equally good news, but the news I've got has to be howled out. Should be howled out. It's so terrible." And Macduff said, "Are you talking in general terms or for one particular person?" So he's starting to suspect now. And Ross says, "Well, it would be terrible for anybody, but it's mainly about you." And then Macduff says, "Tell me quickly." And Ross says, "Please don't hate me for telling you this." And Macduff is obviously now starting to guess what the news is. And Ross finally tells him, "Your castle has been attacked. Your wife and children have been savagely killed. And to tell you the exact details would just make things worse." And obviously, Malcolm is also horrified. Merciful heaven. And we don't need to worry too much about that bit there. So now at this point, Macduff is going to keep repeating, "What, my wife as well, my children as well, all of them." He's in shock, right? He can't take it all in. And Ross has to keep repeating the bad news. And he's saying, "Oh, and I wasn't there. My wife killed too." He's repeating. And he says, "I have said." And Malcolm tries to comfort him, saying, "Use this feeling to build up your revenge, your feelings of revenge against Macbeth." And here he's saying, Macduff says, "Oh, Macbeth, it's because he doesn't have children. He doesn't know what it must be like to lose them." And he keeps repeating, "All of them, my wife as well, to damn his mother, all in one go." Malcolm says, "Bear it like a man." And I guess this bit here is to reference to like gender roles, how men and women should be. But I think most people would agree that no matter how strong a man is, if he loses all his wife and all his children in one go, if it doesn't affect him, he's not a man. He's a robot. He's made of stone. And so that's what Macduff says, that I have to feel it as a man as well. And then he says, did God look on and not help them? And he kind of berates himself, sinful Macduff, that he's full of sin, that his wife and children were killed because of him. They were innocent. They didn't do anything. Yeah, so that's what he's saying here. And heaven rest them now. Malcolm repeats, use this feeling to build up your sense of revenge. And Macduff says, oh, I could cry like a woman and scream like a woman, but enough of that. Bring me this fiend of Scotland, this demon, so in other words, Macbeth, within my sword's length, in other words, in front of me with my sword in my hand. And if he escapes, then heaven forgive him. And Malcolm says, okay, that's more like it. Now you're being like a man. Let's go to King Edward. Our power is ready. Soldiers are ready. Everything's ready. All that's waiting is for us to basically leave. And he says, Macbeth is ripe for shaking, ripe for attacking. And the powers above, so God, okay, um, has is ready as well to help us, is on our side. Okay, so that's the end of the scene. Right, so important scene because it's about kingship and leadership, and also it's about receiving the news. So from a plot point of view, Macduff receives the news and it gives him extra motivation, not that he really needed it, to attack Macbeth. So that's, you just need to know the summary of the scene. So those two things, and you need to be able to refer to the scene if necessary, but you don't really need to learn any quotes from it as such. You don't need to analyze it line by line. But so this is one of the main things, okay? The idea of kingship and the good and bad qualities. So these are the bad qualities that Shakespeare lists. These are the good ones, and just to make you think about them, pick out what you think are the three worst and the three best. So it's just something to think about. There's no right answers here. And then as a challenge question, just to think about, do you think Macduff was right to leave his wife and children? Was he right to put his country above his family? Or so what do you think? So pause the video here, answer these questions, and then I'm going to move to the next slide with the answers. So pause the video, have a go. I'm going to move to the next slide. 3, 2, 1, go. So I've just picked out these three. No right answers really. It's just to make you think about those qualities. And then I've said my answer here is that he should have taken his wife and children with him. He was foolish to think that they would be safe from Macbeth. Okay, so that's just one answer. As long as you've got something that makes some kind of sense, that's fine. Okay, so as I said, a long scene, and if we were to add the audio, it would become a bit too long. So that's the scene. If you need to go back and look at the summary, that's fine. But we've covered the main things, and as always, if you found that useful, please don't forget to subscribe and to tell all your friends, and I will see you in the next scene.